Now it has become a new front line in the battle between pro- and anti-Gaddafi forces. These pictures were shot by journalists brought here by the regime. The idea was to show the outside world that Gaddafi is still in control here. Instead, the reporters found that AlJazeera was in rebel hands, at least for now. The town is surrounded by pro-Gaddafi forces. Both sides are armed with tanks and anti-aircraft guns. Gaddafi's crackdown against his opponents has been the bloodiest and most ruthless in the wave of uprisings sweeping North Africa and the Middle East. But it doesn't seem to have stemmed the rebellion against his 4-decade rule. In the east of the country, opposition forces are welcoming visitors to what they are calling Free Libya. In the city of Benghazi, there are signs of a return to normal. Banks have reopened here and in the town of Al-Baida, both of which threw off Gaddafi's rule about a week ago.
The banks have been closed for 8 days, but thanks to our brave young men, they've managed to reopen in an orderly fashion. And praise be to God, everything is moving along smoothly.
And while residents stock up at the supermarket, the power vacuum that was left in the city is being filled. Local committees that are running towns and cities in the east of Libya have rallied behind a new leader, the former justice minister who resigned over the brutal repression.
What is happening in Libya is a popular revolution led by the youth, supported by the people against oppression and against a dictator who has led Libya with a singular point of view and with a vengeful attitude and bloodthirsty soul. Now we announce to the world that we intend to build a democratic nation with institutions that respect international obligations and treaties.
Libya relies on its oil fields. They're the mainstay of its economy. But now production appears to be grinding to a halt. This refinery is pumping 11,000 barrels a day, only 1/10 of what it would normally produce, according to the manager. The expatriate workers who used to man the plant have fled to escape the violence. Muammar Gaddafi's options are shrinking. Opposition forces continue to advance towards the capital, and the international community has imposed sanctions which further limit his room for manoeuvre. But the Libyan leader still shows no sign of being in the mood to surrender. Jackie Rowland, Al Jazeera, Benghazi.
The United Nations estimates that more than 1,000 civilians have been killed in the fighting in Libya so far, but the Gaddafi family denies that. Speaking to the American network ABC, Saif al-Islam, one of Gaddafi's sons, said the reporting on Libya has been unfair.
Show me a single attack, show me a single bomb, show me a single casualty. The Libyan Air Force destroyed just the ammunition sites, where the big stores of ammunition and depot. That's it. The point that you are hearing rumors, false reports, please take your camera tomorrow morning, even this night, go to every city in Libya. Everything is calm, everything is peaceful. The point, there is a big gap between reality and the media reports.
Fresh fighting has broken out in the Tunisian capital, Tunis. Police fired tear gas and warning shots in the capital, Tunis, to disperse crowds on the 3rd consecutive day of violence. 3 people have been killed and several others wounded in clashes between security forces and demonstrators since Friday. The violence comes as Mohamed Ghannouchi announces he will step down as Prime Minister. He had planned to guide the country to elections in July after President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali was deposed last month. Former Foreign Minister Al-Beji Qaid Al-Sebsi has been appointed in his place. Well, with the unrest in Libya, the US and Iran briefly found themselves in agreement condemning Gaddafi's actions. President Ahmadinejad and Obama both said killing his own citizens was unacceptable. But now the US has hit out at Iran, saying the United States and the world will continue to bear witness to the Iranian government's blatant violation of the universal rights of its citizens and its ongoing hypocrisy. Iranians deserve the same justice and rights that their government extols the virtue of abroad. For more, let's talk to John Terrett. He's in Washington. And John, well, there you have the United States and Iran on the same side, but of course Washington not wasting any chance to slam Iran's record on human rights as well. What do you make of the timing of all this?
Well, Anand, you're absolutely right. This came as shock to us today. It came out of the blue. It's not from the White House as such. It comes from the spokesperson for the National Security Council, Tommy Vietor. And although you can say that it's coming from the White House, it's not coming directly from the building behind me. The document that you've just quoted condemns Iran's intimidation campaign against politicians and human rights activists and students and journalists. It also condemns Tehran for denying its people information by trying to jam satellites and also blocking the World Wide Web. And I think that what is going on here is that the United States government is keen not to allow what it sees as an emboldened Iran the chance to carry out human rights abuses behind the smokescreen of what is happening in the Arab world, with the arrests that we've seen and been reporting on in Egypt and Bahrain and now, of course, Libya. Also, European diplomats are talking about ramping up sanctions against members of the Tehran regime who they accuse of human rights abuses. And of course, there is the ongoing situation involving two men who sought public office, one of them the office of the presidency in Iran back in those disputed presidential elections in 2009. That's Mir Hussein Mousavi and also Mahdi Karoubi. Both these men have been held under house arrest with their families since 2009, June of that year. And one human rights organization, the International Campaign for Human Rights in Iran, is reporting that the men and their families have been moved to a safe house, which means they don't know where they are anymore, and they're very concerned for what is happening to them. So I think that's the reason for the release of that statement this afternoon here in Washington, D.C. Anand?
John, you mentioned Libya just a moment ago. Well, of course, we had that big resolution passed at the United Nations yesterday, that sanctions resolution against Libya. What else has Washington been saying about the events in Libya right now?
Well, you're right. It's been a very busy day here in the United States, particularly in New York yesterday with that Security Council resolution which imposed sanctions, financial and travel restrictions against the Gaddafi family, and also imposed a ban on the sale of weapons to Libya. Well, now today, the US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has just landed in Geneva, Switzerland, where on Monday she will attend various meetings concerned with the United Nations Human Rights Council. And she has been speaking, ramping up the pressure on the Gaddafi regime by saying that the United States is reaching out to many different Libyans, particularly in the east of the country, as the revolution appears to spread west towards Tripoli. She's also said today that the US is offering any kind of assistance to Libyans who might wish to try to overthrow Colonel Gaddafi and members of his family. And that comes as two very senior United States senators speaking in the Egyptian capital, Cairo, called today for the imposition of a no-fly zone over Libya, also for the White House behind me to recognize the provisional government that is clearly getting going now in Benghazi, as we have been reporting. And in the case of one of the senators, the hawkish but independent Joe Lieberman, he called for the White House to begin arming members of the Libyan opposition. So they're really ramping up the rhetoric, and they're doing this because they feel that most of the Americans who were in Libya who wished to leave have now done so, leaving on that catamaran ferry that went into Malta at the back end of last week. And so the Secretary of State now at the Human Rights Council meeting in Geneva is going to have top-level bilateral meetings with senior politicians around the world behind closed doors about what their next move will be in a post-Gaddafi era. Anand?
All right, thanks, John. John Terrett there at the White House. In Oman, at least 2 people have been killed in clashes between protesters and security forces. 8 others were injured. Police used tear gas to disperse the demonstrators. 2,000 people had gathered in the country's industrial center of Sohar to demand political reform. Oman's ruler quickly offered a new jobs plan in response to the protest. Sultan Qaboos bin Said ordered the government to find jobs for 50,000 people. He will also give every job seeker around $400 a month until they find work. Qaboos will also consider giving more power to the popularly elected Advisory Council. Jordan's Prime Minister is promising to introduce new political reforms after the opposition threatened more demonstrations. It comes as supporters of King Abdullah held a show of solidarity in the capital, Amman. The rally follows weeks of nationwide protests by the opposition. Its leaders say the country's pace of reform has been too slow. Now, thousands of people marched through the capital of Bahrain in a demonstration against the monarchy. Protesters have rejected the king's appeal for dialogue and called for him to step down. The impasse is entering its 3rd week. The demonstrators' demands include free elections and the release of more political prisoners. 4 people have died in bomb attacks that forced the closure of Iraq's largest oil refinery. The blast sparked a huge fire at the site north of Baghdad in an area which was once an al-Qaeda stronghold. Iraq's oil minister says it hit only one production unit. Iraq's oil products are only used for domestic power generation and consumption and not exported. Officials in Egypt unveiled the first proposed political reforms since the revolution. While they allow new political parties, restrictions on the participation of the Muslim Brotherhood have not been lifted. Anita McNaught reports from Cairo.
As emotions subside on Tahrir Square, the business of making change happen for all Egyptians has begun. The Egyptian constitution perpetuated the country's draconian emergency laws and consolidated power in the hands of the former president. This committee of legal experts was tasked by Egypt's temporary rulers, the military, with proposing reforms to 6 articles. They tackled 11. But one controversial paragraph remains untouched, Article 5, that prohibits parties with religious affiliations from standing in elections. One of the committee members is with the Muslim Brotherhood, the party most affected by this exclusion. Far from being concerned about the omission, he believes it was too contentious for them to touch.
It's a flawed article, but we didn't want to amend any article that had an ideological dimension. We're leaving that to an elected committee.
But political analyst Gamel Sultan doesn't think this law will pose an obstacle to the Muslim Brotherhood in the future.
It is not about the text itself. It's about the context within which this text is going to be interpreted. And I think the current and the future context will be much more tolerant vis-à-vis the Muslim Brotherhood.
Egypt's popular revolution threw up a new generation of progressive political activists, the hope of a vibrant and reinvigorated country, a break with the past. But critics of these first tentative steps say the march to new elections is going too fast, with these new players not given the time to form parties, and they warn the constitutional reforms don't go far enough. They don't secure a place for the new voices. They may even entrench the old ones.
This is a system that is likely to create or to allow a bigger chance for the Muslim Brothers plus the NDP to dominate the new parliament. It looks like some sort of a deal is there, a sort of a deal at the expense at the new, modern, secular, social and political forces.
The people of Egypt are impatient for change. If they find 6 months down the track that the revolution has merely delivered a new version of the old order, some of these people are going to be seriously disappointed. Anita McNaught, AlJazeera, in Tahrir Square, Cairo.
As anti-government forces in Libya continue to capture more of the country, Muammar Gaddafi's options are dwindling. Coming up, we'll take a look at what parts of the country are still under the colonel's control. And we are live in Hollywood for the biggest night in movies. That's right after the break.
Hello again. It certainly is rather cool for many of us in the western parts of the States. If we take a look at the satellite picture, we can see the cloud here all feeding down from Canada, dragging in all that cool air and bringing us a fair amount of snow as well. It's going to be another rather unsettled day for many of us as we head through Monday, and still not that warm. San Francisco there only getting to around 13 degrees. It's far milder towards the east. Look at the temperatures here. Atlanta up at 24 degrees, and that's 75 Fahrenheit. All of this rain, though, is pushing its way across us, and behind that it will turn a lot fresher. Now, a bit further south, there's plenty of sunshine for many of us, but not all of us. There are some showers. They crack off over parts of Nicaragua and then push all the way down through parts of Colombia and into Venezuela. Heavy downpours out of that, and at times the showers will be banding together to give some more prolonged outbreaks of rain as well. Over towards Europe, and generally here things are quite quiet, but they're certainly not that warm. Moscow, as a top temperature, will be getting to -12, and in London the temperatures here are tumbling away as well. London this time only getting to around 5 degrees. For the Mediterranean, that's where all the unsettled weather is. Lots of wet weather, strong winds too, and that's also affecting us through parts of Algeria and Tunisia for Monday as well.
taken stolen goods and he's now dumping them onto the world without any sort of consideration.